Hi, everyone. I'm here with Marc Effron. Marc is the best-selling author of 8 Steps to High Performance. Focus on what you can change and ignore the rest. Marc, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Art. Happy to be here.
I have to tell you, I love this book for a lot of reasons, and I'll share those as we go through this. But, kind of in my opinion, here's what I walked away with. This is the owner's manual for high performance I wish someone would have given me at some point in my career. So, darn that I have to spend 30 years actually figuring all of this out. And then to have you wrap it all up in such a wonderful package with your book here. Just love it. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Art. And to be honest, that was really the intention of this book. I was a little bit frustrated that there was so much information floating out there that the average leader needed to sort through, filter through, figure out what mattered, what didn't matter. Why didn't we just put together a book where it said, here's all the stuff that matters, just do this?
Well, thank you for doing that. So I counted them, and I think there are about three quadrillion blog posts or articles on how to achieve high performance out there. What's the difference between what you're doing here with your 8 steps and those so many listicles that I can find?
Yeah, and I was similarly frustrated that there was so much information out there, some more legitimate than others.
Sure.
And so when I was originally talking with my editor about this, she had the same question. Hey, Marc, another leadership book? Really? And I said, well, look, I find a few things missing from most leadership books, starting with very few of them are based on really good quality science, meaning substitute the word facts for science. So there's lots of opinions and lots of interesting thoughts. And hey, I had this experience. But I'm a belt and suspenders level of confidence guy.
Okay.
And so one step, let's start from the hardcore facts about what we know is true about how people succeed at work. Secondly, a lot of those books were about individual topics. So here's how you can be good at emotional intelligence, or here's how you can be good at leading teams. But no book really tried to integrate everything and say, well, there's many things you could do. What are the few most important things you should do? And unfortunately, a lot of books are written by lifetime consultants or lifetime academics who've never actually had to do any of the things that they write about. And so
Right.
Yeah, I find kind of a lack of practicality sometimes in those books. Kind of in theory, sure, sounds great, but you've obviously never worked with real people.
Well, I'll certainly confess to you because I had these slight guilt palpitations as I was reading through the book. So I do have I have 30 years of corporate experience in software and tech. And what I tend to do, however, in all of my writing is rely just a little bit too much on my experience-based perspective. And I viewed your book as a nice 2x4 across the head to remind me that I need to focus on the facts. And the experience is good, but what does science really say about it?
Yeah, well, I think a healthy balance of those two is appropriate. So
Sure.
we all have great experiences. And the question is, are we extrapolating from our individual experience to say this is good for everyone, which in many cases might not be? You and I are a couple of white guys who've worked in big corporate environments. That might not be the right advice for other people if they've been context. I hate to shock you with that one, but from what I see on this end of the video.
Yeah, I did notice that. Yeah. Hey, so I have to ask a sidebar kind of question. I was intrigued that you took a lot of, can I call them jabs at some of the more popular things out there? I believe strengths-based type of coaching. You loved power posing, didn't you? You really had an issue with power posing, growth mindsets. So a lot of those things that we're all reading and talking about right now, you kind of took issue with.
Sure. And this goes back to one of my first points around the science. My view is there's so much information out there for leaders who really want to get better at what they do. Part of the challenge is that they're distracted by things that actually aren't proven to be true. And so one of my passions is helping not only steer people in the right direction, but sometimes it's as helpful to make sure they don't go down the wrong road because they can't get that time back. If they've just spent an hour power posing, I guarantee you that hour is lost forever. And so one reason why I try to, in not just in this work, but in most of my writing, flag things that either are not proven to be true or are proven not to be true, is to help leaders say, okay, I won't waste my time doing that. And there are things like strengths, which have become wildly successful. The Gallup folks have done a brilliant job promoting that. But even they don't claim that it yields better results. They claim that people will enjoy focusing on their strengths more than focusing on their weaknesses.
I think that's in the fine print, isn't it? Yeah, because
and I endorse that completely. It is so much more fun not to focus on things you aren't good at. Focusing on things you aren't good at is painful and embarrassing and slow. But it happens to be, according to the science, what's going to allow most of us to succeed. So I see it less as jabs and more as simply saying, if you have some science or facts, hey, put them out there so the rest of us can evaluate them.
Have you been invited to do a TED Talk?
I have not. I'm not sure of TikTok material, but
no. And again, I don't mean to take away from the seriousness and the power of the book. My only other observation was I think I learned from you that if I spend too much time working on my emotional intelligence, I may become a sociopath.
There's the potential. It's not guaranteed.
Yeah. So we're in an airplane line getting set to board. I run into you. We haven't seen each other in a long time. I say, hey, Mark, I hear you've got a brand new book out there. What's the quick pitch on who this book is for and what it's all about?
Sure. The quick pitch is there's really good news for anyone who wants to be a higher performer at work. And that is that there's a ton of great science that tells you exactly what to do. And even the priority order of what order you should do it in. So what matters most? And if folks would simply pay attention to that, anyone who wants to be a higher performer can be a higher performer.
Yeah, one of the beauties of this book, the power of this book is, I guess the word is simplicity. I mean, you distill it down into fundamental steps and behaviors, these 8 steps, and it's actionable with the tools that you have. And unlike so many other things that I read. So again, just, I'll wax poetic about it. And I don't do that with every book. I love this book. May I share the 8 steps in there?
Please do.
And I think the short form is they were described: set big goals, behave to perform, grow yourself faster, connect, maximize your fit, fake it, love that title, commit your body, and avoid distractions. So are any of these steps any more important than the others?
Absolutely. The reason that set big goals is the first step is because the science is unbelievably powerful. That big goals drive bigger results. We're hardwired as human beings to respond to a unit of challenge with a unit of effort. So if you say, if Art says, Mark, jump a foot in the air, I'll give you $1. I'm going to try and jump 1 foot. If you say jump 2 feet, $2, I'll jump 2 feet, 3 feet. I'm going to keep trying to respond to your challenge with additional effort until either I'm too physically exhausted to do it, or the relationship between my effort and the reward becomes skewed. So if I say, hey, Art, 4 feet, $4, and you say, nope, still $3, then I'm going to stop. But we're hardwired to respond to challenge with effort. And that includes if we challenge ourselves. And most of us don't have any lack of things to do. So this is not saying, oh, you don't have goals. Most of us set far too many goals, or we pretend that our activities are goals. Oh, I have 100 things to do. Well, yeah, we all have 100 things to do. What are the 3 big promises you want to make to your employer about what you're going to deliver to them next year? Those are your goals. Now, there might be 100 tasks underneath that. Sure. There might be 50 other things you still need to get done during the year. Of course there are. But what are the 3 big things you're going to deliver? As simple as that sounds, what I tell my clients is, imagine if you were asked to deliver twice next year what you were asked to deliver this year, twice. Now, most clients say, Mark, that is an absolutely ridiculous premise. There's no way I can maybe deliver 2% more. I say, but think about, what would you need to change? What behaviors would you need to shift? What work would you need to eliminate? What work would you need to delegate? What would you need to change in your life to deliver twice next year what you delivered this year? And it's amazing how that can focus the mind. Now apply that to saying, hey, if I could only get 3 things done, if I could get them done in a masterful way, what would those 3 things be? It is amazing how it eliminates all the kind of the side work that we think is important, but really isn't.
Love that. So you propose a bit of a goal-setting framework, and I think it actually originated in your earlier book, if I'm not mistaken, and it sort of differentiates from the commonly used and referenced SMART goal setting. Can you explain a little bit about what yours is?
Sure. So simple goals. So there's nothing wrong with SMART goals. I think most leaders were taught SMART goals.
Sure.
Here's the challenge that I've always found is that you can set a SMART goal that doesn't really matter. So kind of a technically perfectly constructed goal, but one that, if you were my boss, you would say, well, thanks, Mark, but, not going to make a lot of difference in what happens in the company. We like what we call simple goal setting, capital SIM. So specific, that's pretty obvious. Hey, Art, I'm going to deliver 112% of last year. Important. Does Art care that I'm delivering 112% of last year? Or maybe that's not a meaningful goal. And then measurable. So just the classic, well, is Art going to know if Mark actually did what he said he was going to do? So specific, important, measurable, simple goal setting. It's really the important piece that I think differentiates that methodology from SMART. Now, is that a sword I'm going to fall on, whether you use SMART or simple? No. Okay. But I do think for many leaders that the I in the important piece differentiates a goal from a goal that's really going to impact your company.
What I love too is there's a nice consistent integration of that concept in understanding and making certain that you're fitting properly, tuning into what's really important to your boss as well as your organization. So a lot of this flows together and integrates wonderfully.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you think about, there's actually a concept I introduced early in the book called theoretical maximum performance, which goes to that integration point. And theoretical maximum performance is actually a concept that comes from Olympic weightlifting. And a number of years ago, some Olympic weightlifting coaches were curious. Could they calculate the optimal amount or the maximum amount of weight that an Olympic weightlifter could lift if all of the dimensions related to that were in perfect harmony? So if their nutrition was perfect, their training was perfect, their mindset was perfect, et cetera. If all the dimensions of lifting were in perfect harmony, could they calculate how much they could lift? And they actually came up with a pretty good calculation. And what they determined was the average person who goes to the gym and lifts weights can lift about 40% of their theoretical maximum weight. And someone who works out pretty hard and focuses on weightlifting can lift about 60% of their theoretical maximum. But Olympic weightlifters who have as many of those things in harmony as possible can lift 92 to 93% of their theoretical maximum. So what that says is there's lots of things, just like weightlifting, that go into our performance. And if you're integrating the goal setting and the behaviors and the faking it and the sleep, if all those things are integrated, you get cumulatively closer to that theoretical maximum performance level. And so one of the challenges I always offer when I'm speaking about this or talking to my clients is, what's possible if all this stuff was in perfect concert, which admittedly is very difficult. Right. But how good could you be?
Oh, I absolutely love that. All right. So early in the book, you established that, hey, all of us with respect to, and correct me if I misuse the terms at all, have about 50% of our potential we're kind of born with, whether it's our base intelligence, our personality that we gain much of from our parents and so forth. And it's the other 50% that we need to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I try to very specifically call out, they're just things you can't change that are going to affect your career. Intelligence is a big one. Intelligence is the single largest predictor of success at work. And so you can either praise your parents or curse your parents, but you can't do a darn thing about that after about age 18. Same thing with personality factors. And by personality, I don't mean behaviors. So I very specifically call out, you are in complete control of your behaviors, but the baseline for those behaviors or how you're kind of naturally wired to act, same thing, fixed by the time you're 18 or 20. Socioeconomic background. Maybe you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Maybe you came from a more disadvantaged background. Great. Either way, by the time you get to the working world, that's going to affect you, but you can't change a darn thing about it. So, and it's not meant to sound too cute or pithy, but forget about those things, ignore those things you can't change, because there are a lot of things that I capture in the 8 steps that you actually
sure
about work.
Yeah, manage the controllables. Yeah, I love the perspective. So okay, so we have 50% of it's controllable or not controllable. The other half is in fact controllable. I want to be a high performer. First of all, how do you define high performer and high performance?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's one of those terms people throw around without a lot
all over the place. Yeah, right.
What I would say is high performance means that you are both delivering and behaving at the 75th percentile compared to your peers for a sustained period of time. Okay. Now, a few key phrases in there. 1, 75th percentile. That means you're better than 3 out of 4 folks on average. Mm-hmm. And this is not comparing yourself to the dumb folks in the office. This is compared to other smart people in the office. Sustained performance. So it's not that you have one brilliant year, but year after year, you seem to be doing better than 3 out of 4 folks, and both performance and behaviors. So it's not that you're a really nice guy, but you don't deliver the goods, or that you deliver every year and you're a total jerk. Those things have to be working well together.
So you had some kind of tough love for the reality of what it takes to be a high performer. I mean, there was no 4.5-hour work week in here. Sorry, Tim.
Yeah. And in fact, I just wrote another article about the 4-day work week, which seems to be getting popular as well. And
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, share it with the world here. This was, you didn't pull any punches on this point. You're going to work a lot.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I never thought that would be a point that needed to be made. It seems like a bit of a truism. Gee, people who work harder will probably, not guaranteed, probably be higher performers. But
Mark, that gets in the way of my work-life balance.
There you go. The kids need to go to soccer, and I want to take a vacation. And what about, shouldn't I still be a high performer? And I threw that topic out to the internet. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So I threw out what I thought was a pretty benign post probably 2 years ago. And it said something like, you probably need to work at least 50 hours a week to even start to be considered to be a high performer. Mm-hmm. And I thought that, maybe 3 people would be upset about that. The screaming that ensued from that post, how dare you tell me that you have to work hard to be a high performer? Well, the challenge is there's just some simple math that goes along with it. First, let's say that Art and Mark are perfectly matched employees, equally intelligent, equally committed, equally engaged, and they have the same task to do. Mark works at it for 40 hours a week. Art works at it for 60 hours a week. Well, it's not guaranteed that Art will advance on that task faster than Mark. I'd put a paycheck on that. It's probably likely that at some point hours are going to matter. Now, sometimes I hear people say, well, I work smart, not hard.
Right.
Well, sometimes that means, and they'll say, well, I know a guy who works 60 hours a week and gets nothing done. Okay, great. You're not comparing yourself to the office idiot. You should be comparing yourself to other smart people. So are you really working that much smarter than other people are working? And part of it is just personal sacrifice around things like travel. The higher you go up in the food chain, the more likely you are to be spending more time on airplanes and in hotel rooms and in other places that you might not want to be. But people who say, hey, I want to be a higher performer, recognize the time pie can only be sliced in so many ways.
Sure.
And so that if you're going to give a bigger slice to work, it means there's a smaller slice for other parts. And probably the other piece of that is also recognizing performance is always relative. If I deliver 110% of my goal this year and Art delivers 130% of his goal this year, I had a good year, but guess what? I'm the loser of the group.
Yeah, interesting. So, and I know I'm asking for conjecture here, not science, but why do you think there was such an outcry to that notion of you really do have to put the time in?
Yeah, I think there is I think there's some legitimate concern to say that some people, and oftentimes this becomes women, aren't able to put in as many hours as men are, because it's been very clearly proven women bear a larger burden of housework, a larger burden of child rearing. So there's a legitimate question of, does this mean that certain people who cannot spend time cannot be a high performer? Mm-hmm. No, but what it does say is that we shouldn't expect that someone who can only contribute 30 hours a week is likely going to be able to deliver as much as someone who's willing to work 60. Now, it doesn't mean in those 30 hours, you can't be the most productive, highest performing person for 30 hours. Cool. You'll beat everybody else who can only give that much. But it's going to be very difficult to be able to compete against someone who has far more ability to sacrifice and contribute from an hours perspective. So I think there's a legitimate concern, but there's also just the mathematical reality of what high performance comes from.
Well, I think you highlight in the book, too, that part of those 60 hours comes from, one, you're getting recognition. Two, you're probably able to network more effectively with people because you're involved. There's just a lot of kind of side or ancillary benefits of that additional time that you're putting into it. And people begin to recognize that.
Yeah.
People who matter.
I sometimes hear things along with that work smart argument. Well, I don't hang out at the coffee machine like some other people.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Hanging out at the coffee machine is called? It's networking. And it's
can we put that right up there with I don't play those games? Well,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Those games exist everywhere. You don't want to play them unethically, but if you're not in the political game, you're out.
Yeah, and it's funny. I'm not sure if I had this in the book or not, but I had a great coach in one of my former corporate lives, and I said, "Hey, coach, I don't play those politics games. That's fundamentally offensive." And what that coach told me was, Mark, the game that is being played is called politics.
Right.
Now, you can decide you don't want to play the game. That's fine. You're then out of the game. But you can't be in the game and say you're not going to play it. And he also said very helpfully, people who are good at it call it relationship building. People who are not good at it call it politics.
I love that. I love that. You do a wonderful job highlighting many great people out there. The one I liked and I saw multiple references to was Jeff Pfeffer and his book, Power, which, by the way, when the book came out a number of years ago, I interviewed him as well. And it's been one of my go-to books ever since.
Yeah, I think Jeff has been great, and I think Jeff is underread. I mean, he's a very popular guy, but I still think underread by a lot of folks around things like how important understanding and managing power is. And he highlights in a lot of his books just the power of influencing. And how some people, to the conversation around politics, don't understand if art is my boss, sucking up a little bit to art is actually a proven strategy for success. And people get very uncomfortable. In fact, the whole fake it chapter revolved around that. People get very uncomfortable saying, well, that's not me. I'm not that type of person. Oh, so you aren't the type of person who builds a good relationship with your boss?
Back to that relationship issue again.
Exactly.
Right.
And again, some people, I'm fundamentally uncomfortable doing that. I'm an introvert. But I recognize that is one of the steps to high performance. I can choose to take that step or not, but I can't deny that it is a step in that direction.
I was fascinated by one of your research findings, which suggested that there really isn't a limit on the positive outcome from flattery.
Yeah, and this was something that Jeff actually highlighted in one of his books, and it was that literally, if I just flatter you for an hour, Art, 10 minutes in, you're going to say, look, I know you're just flattering me, but you're never going to think worse of me for that flattery. You're going to label me Mark as a flatterer, but you're not going to say Mark is a jerk flatterer. You're going to say Mark's a flatterer. So most of us have no limits for how willing we are to hear good things about ourselves.
The content that I'm really pondering in the book is on the behaviors, behave to perform, choosing those right behaviors and eliminating, at least for the moment, the derailers. And I think it seems to tie well in with the fake it content. So can you help us kind of wrap our brains around this?
Sure. And what I found interesting when I dug into the research, and maybe just to step back a bit, I read through more than 2,000 academic articles when I was researching this book. So any article that claimed a relationship between something that you do as an individual and higher performance at work, read through it, tried to figure out kind of what is true. And in reading through the pieces around behavior, it was interesting what came out was that even though there is almost a stereotypical view that we have of what a good leader is and what a good leader does to drive higher performance, there are actually multiple models. So there is what I will call kind of the good leader model, builds their team and encourages people and engagement. But there's also a model that I call the performance driving model in the book.
So one was transformational model and then performance, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that performance model is based on good, solid science. It says some people respond really well to being given a big challenge and lots of flexibility and very direct feedback. And they don't want to be coddled, and they don't want to be told to go home at 8 o'clock at night. They're really happy digging into that particular piece of work. So I think one key finding was there are multiple ways to behave on what I'll call the bright side to be a high performer. But also, and I kind of knew this science going in, but wanted to reinforce it in the book, what's likely going to hold most leaders back is what the folks at Hogan Assessments would call the dark side of behaviors, which is essentially personality turned up too high. And I was honored that Dr. Bob Hogan, the founder of Hogan Assessments, took his big derailer instrument and condensed it down to 11 questions, one for each derailer in the book. So readers of the book can do a quick self-assessment. And what science would say is most of us are going to, because of our natural personalities, are going to mess up our careers in one of three ways, which we call derailers. We're either going to move away from people, meaning we're going to engage in behaviors that put distance between ourselves and others. That might be things like, I'm a reserved guy. I might spend a lot of time in my office, not do a lot of networking. That puts distance between me and somebody else. We might move against people. Moving against people puts us into other people's spaces. So that might be, I'm always the guy talking at the meetings. Hey, Art, another great idea. Pay attention to me. Hey, did anyone want to hear my great idea? It's a really great idea. Moving against people is maybe you're proud of yourself, but that dial is turned up too high. So that can damage our careers. Or the third one is called, third category, moving towards people. Now, moving towards people are ingratiating behaviors, kiss-up behaviors in many ways, and that might include things like being overly diligent. So diligent means I'm going to follow the rules exactly. Whether they're the right rules, the wrong rules, I'm going to do exactly what I'm asked to do. And oftentimes that can show up as your team feeling like they're disempowered because they have no autonomy, no control, or that Mark doesn't have a spine because he'll do what he's told to do. He'll never challenge the rules. So that's kind of a long way around behaviors, but the two big findings: one, there are multiple kind of bright ways to succeed. It might not be the stereotypical model that we all think about, but it is those derailers, those dark side behaviors that we all have that tend to show under stress or when we're just not thinking about kind of the right way to behave that are going to interfere with our careers.
So how do we identify the right behaviors for the circumstance or situation?
I think part of it is, what do you feel naturally comfortable engaging in? There are some leaders whose personality and experience are going to say, hey, I believe in a more engaging style. I believe in a style that is more inclusive and draws people in. Or, hey, I'm going to give people a big challenging assignment, set them free and let them manage. Both styles can work. I think you need to be aware enough of the challenges that your team members have, of the individual capabilities they bring to bear to decide which is likely to be the best style. What's interesting, and this research came out a little bit too late for me to include in the book, the research is pretty clear that most people respond better to being told what to do than to having kind of unfettered freedom to do what they want.
I knew it.
and it's funny because this goes back to intelligence. Up to about the 75th percentile of intelligence, at least for initial tasks. So if you haven't done something before, you're going to do better. Art's my boss. Art says, Mark, do it like this, as opposed to, hey, explore and think about it. Now, if I'm in the upper quartile of intelligence, then I will actually do better kind of playing around. But for the vast majority of folks, being told what to do is a superior performance strategy.
So a lot of the people I engage with are navigating, leading up to challenging communication situations. It could be that tense board meeting where they feel like they're on trial, and frankly, they probably are. It could be dealing with difficult staff members that frankly they're afraid to engage. And many of them have expressed that when they've tried these before, they've navigated it all wrong and they're frustrated with themselves. So how do we both blend the behaviors and the fake it component to do a better job in those settings?
Yeah, I have a whole chapter entitled "Fake It," and "Fake It" really talks about the fact that it's unlikely that any of us has that perfect set of behaviors and skills that's going to match with every single situation we might face.
Hmm.
We might be about to walk into that boardroom and know that all the guns are pointed at us,
Hmm.
and still need to be able to put on a positive and kind face. And at moments like that, you might need to fundamentally fake a behavior. Now, what does fake a behavior mean? Fake a behavior means that you're going to be like a chameleon, and you're going to walk into that room, and instead of saying, "This is who I am, this is how I'm going to behave," you look at that room, you read the room, and you say, who's the ideal Marc to show up right now? What does this group need from me? Do they need challenge? Do they need apologies? What's going to allow me to win in this moment? As opposed to saying, I'm special and unique and genuine, and that's what I'm going to show them. Well, they don't care about this special, unique, and genuine you. They're looking for something. Are you able to deliver it? And in many ways, all you're doing is you're putting on an actor's face. And you're saying, I can be an actor for the 30 minutes of that board meeting.
Hmm.
Now, this is where to our earlier conversation. Well, that's not the genuine me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not being authentic, Mark. It's not the authentic me.
There you go. Well,
right, yeah.
well, then we will fire the authentic you and we'll keep the fake you. That's the call. And I think that's what we get wrapped up in, well, we're unique and special. Well, sure you are. Is it possible, just maybe possible, that the unique and special you isn't the perfect fit for every possible situation?
It's impossible, but no, right.
And I tell the story all the time when I'm kind of on stage talking about 8 steps, is that I'm not really comfortable being on stage. It's not kind of naturally what I like to do, but I know someone who is brilliant on stage, and you probably know Marshall Goldsmith.
Of course.
And Marshall is warm and genuine and just the most wonderful person to meet or see speak. And so when I'm about to go up on a big stage, I don't think, well, what would Marshall Goldsmith say? I literally think, I'm Marshall Goldsmith. And I walk up on that stage and it's, good morning, everybody. How you doing? And that's not Marc Effron.
He fills the room with his smile and warmth. Every time I've been in a venue with him, it's amazing. So
there you go. So people don't want to see Marc Effron in that moment. They want to see Marshall Goldsmith. And so I simply pretend that I fake that I'm Marshall Goldsmith.
There's an entire coaching vector and training vector that comes out of this part of the dialogue here. It's just brilliant content that a lot of people don't get. So.
Yeah. And again, it doesn't mean that you need to compromise morals or values or anything else. And I know the moment I walk up off that stage, I'm not Marshall Goldsmith.
Yeah, you're back to you, right?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, seems to be a very good thing to be. So just thought I'd throw that in there.
I thank you. But for the moment I needed to fake it, I faked it.
Yeah. So you got a section in there on commit your body. Exercise has to be a differentiator, isn't it?
I so wanted to find my research that exercise was a differentiator. I looked really hard.
This sounds bad. You mean all these hours we're spending in the gym aren't impacting our ability to be high performers at work?
And I could have given you so many kind of physiologically based arguments before I read it. Well, of course, Art, it's going to happen, X and Y.
Right.
But actually, when you read through all the research, there's just nothing that directly links going to the gym, being in better shape to high performance at work. Now, obviously, if you're sickly and you can't show up, then yeah, that probably will affect. But what does all the research about your body say impacts high performance? It's unbelievably clear. Sleep. Sleep is the foundation for everything else that I talk about in the book. All the other steps really depend on understanding how to manage really the quality. Quantity important, but really the quality of sleep. And what I found in doing the research was it's still pretty equivocal around what matters. So both on quality and quantity. On quality, folks are pretty clear that obviously higher quality sleep matters more than higher quantity. Mm-hmm. So you can get 8 hours of bad sleep that's nowhere near as productive as 5 hours of high quality sleep. But also, what's the right quantity? So the National Sleep Foundation says, well, it's between 6 hours and 10 hours.
Wow.
Okay, well, that's a bit of a stretch. I could do something with those 4 hours. So is it
It's
6
a
or is it
big
10?
range. What about the people that say, oh, I don't really need sleep to be at I'm just one of those kind of freaks?
Yeah, so what the science would say is there's about 5% of people who can actually survive on less than 5 hours of sleep a night, and the rest of the folks who say they do that are probably on a couple of venti lattes and kind of pretending that they can do it well.
Right.
But the challenge, actually, it's interesting. Even if you get 5 hours of good quality sleep, you might still retain what we call the executive functions, which is strategic thinking and creativity, kind of all the things that are going to make you more successful. But guaranteed, if you're not getting the hours, what fails are some of the basic things like, where are my car keys? Where's my office? It's those basic functions that fail when we don't get the quantity we need. So you might still show up in the meeting well, but you might forget the right route to drive home.
Interesting. So I suppose my one request is please dig deeper into that exercise thing. I want you to find a positive tie-in.
Oh, you and me both.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, as I went through this, I suppose I have two questions. So the individual who picks this book up and works through it and loves it and is excited and wants to be and fit into that definition of high performer, willing to put the time and effort in. How do they begin to put this to work? There's a lot in here. Even with 8 simple steps, they're simple but not simplistic.
So a few things. One, download the free toolkit that goes with the book. So all the assessments and quizzes and everything else you can download from the website, and the book tells you how to do that. But then pick the one thing that you'd like to start getting better at. I'm clear in the book that if you try to work on everything at once, it's probably not going to happen. So back to the set a few big goals. What's the one thing you would like to get better at this year? And work on that. Next year, great. Pick the next thing.
Pick the next one. Okay.
Maybe you get it done in 4 months. Fantastic. Great.
I mean, that's liberating because sometimes we think we have to digest and act on all of this at one time, and that's overwhelming.
Absolutely. And it's not going to happen. We're busy people. There's no way anyone can work on all 8 steps at the same time. But I would suggest start with chapter 1. If you don't have a few really big challenging goals, and again, divorced from busyness, but a few big challenging goals, start there. Work then to behaviors. Literally work through in that order.
Great. Again, relief there because it was going to be overwhelming for me to apply all of this. So
exactly.
I love that. So now let's shift to the manager who buys this book, loves it, hands it out to her team, and wants to begin effectively managing and developing and coaching to it. What's your guidance for that individual?
I think a few things. Let's start with the fact that not everybody wants to be a high performer. That surprises a lot of managers, but there's some people who simply want to show up and do a fine job, not a bad job, but a fine job, 50th percentile work. Yeah. Some people are going to say, thanks for the book, boss, and we'll put it over here. So let's go to first step, identify who actually wants to be a higher performer. But then as a boss, if you know the 8 steps, it can be really helpful to do a quick diagnostic to say, hey, what could Mark really benefit from doing the most? Mm-hmm. And even say, hey, Mark, you know what? I think derailers would be an area that would really help you to focus on. Why will you read chapter 2 and we'll chat about it in our next one-to-one. Mm-hmm. So second step, I would say, don't assume that people are naturally going to find the time to do what you've asked them to do. If you believe that these things matter, and the science would suggest you should, mm-hmm. then help your leaders to say, hey, when I look at your performance, I think the one thing you could do to be even better would be X. Hey, let's get a plan around X if you're interested.
That was actually in my one little nitpick in the book was I was waiting for that chapter on how we can begin to use this to change our culture, how we can manage to it. So maybe it's a follow-on.
It could well be. I think a lot of it goes to not everybody wants to be a high performer.
Great point.
In our corporate work, our consulting firm does a lot of work with big companies around the world on high performance. And that's one of the first things we help them to understand is there are a lot of folks here who are great people, committed to the organization, but they just aren't going to our earlier conversation,
Right.
sacrifice, put in the hours, compete with others in a way that drives to high performance. So
Yet they can still be valuable role players, right?
absolutely, absolutely. I love people who show up every day and do a good job. That's a great resource to have, but they might not be the folks who are going to drive that extra few pennies per share next quarter.
I'm really glad we hit on that point. I mean, it seems to me that we might overemphasize that we want this culture filled with nothing but high performers. That could end up being incredibly chaotic and not realistic.
Well, and I would love I actually think if everyone was a high performer, then I'm willing to take the consequences. I'm relatively sure most organizations aren't going to get to that point. And so I think it goes to everyone can be a somewhat higher performer. So back to the fixed 50 and the flexible 50 that I write about in the book, we should help everyone be a bit better.
Right.
But we should recognize some folks are okay the way they are and don't want to get to that higher level.
So from all the research you did, and aside from the exercise point that we talked about, what was the most surprising insight you gained in your many years of study with this?
I think the most surprising insight was that most smart managers already intuitively know those 8 steps. So I hate to use there's nothing new under the sun phrase, but pretty much that's the case. And for good reason, human beings change very, very slowly. We all like to think the world is moving quickly and we're moving quickly with it, but we're really not. Evolution is a pretty slow process. And the things that were true about people 100 years are likely true about them today. And some fundamental things like our personality structure and the fact that intelligence still matters just don't change. What I've learned working around the globe is that people tend to act like people. Because we're all wired in the same way.
Right.
And there's obviously some cultural overlays and a few things. Sure. But in general, if you put people into an environment, they're going to act like people in an environment. And so there's unlikely going to be, and what I didn't find in the research was some new solution to the human condition. We kind of know how people operate. And that's the good news. This is not a moving target. We know what can make people higher performers. And the question is, how willing are we to help people to get there, and how committed are we ourselves to actually apply those steps?
A fabulous way to tie things together. So last question. It's a challenge for you. You get a chance to have dinner, sit around a table with the greatest minds, living or dead, in the study of human performance and psychology, maybe neuroscience. Who's your dinner party there?
I'm glad that editing is possible on this video, Art. Who is my perfect group? So that had to be from the scientific community, or this
does not can be from any walk of life here.
Einstein, Galileo, Jesus Christ, one of the pharaohs. Yeah, that's probably a decent party.
So Marshall's not joining your dinner party here?
I know Marshall stuff well, so it's already well.
All right. Hey, sorry for the curveball, unfair call when just
not at all.
Book, a brilliant job on this. Thanks so much. I'll point to the book in the show notes. I'll point to your firm in the show notes as well. It was an absolute pleasure to talk with you. And again, thanks from all of us, all of those that aspire to be high performers, for this fabulous resource, Marc.
My pleasure, Art. Great to chat with you, and thanks so much for having me on today.
It's a pleasure. Take care.